Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to HighRoad U. Just to give you a brief introduction, my name is Misha Menges. I am the Director of Inbound Marketing at HighRoad Solutions. I am new to the organization, but not new to the world of association and digital marketing. So I've spent over about 15 years of experience in digital marketing. My consulting experience in the social world, association world, has been around digital strategy as well as field and social media marketing as well as change management. So I'm very excited to talk to you today about our topic, which we will cover for the full month. We are currently using Zoom, which is a little bit different from the system platform that if you've participated in any of our webinars before, every Friday, it's a new system, so please bear with us as we get used to it. Hopefully it will be a little bit easier for you to log in and follow along as well. As always, if you have any questions, certainly feel free. There are question and answer and chat features, so certainly feel free to use those as we go throughout our presentation. And of course, if you want to reach out to me offline to talk about further some of the topics that we're talking about or get our take on other topics that might be of interest to you, certainly please feel to reach out to us on, to me in particular on Twitter or on LinkedIn. All right, so this month kicks off a new month. It's hard to believe it's already May. But this month we'll be talking about using social media to grow membership. So throughout the month, kind of as our typical plan works, we start the month out with a general overview, followed by who's doing it right, examples of things that you can get inspired by, and then wrap up the month with looking at metrics and figuring out how you measure for success. So before we get into the basic overviews for our presentation today, it's a question that is typically asked, I'm sure, if you have a digital advisor, if you've got an agency or an analyst or consultant working with you, or perhaps someone from your management team, might casually ask the question, but the question is, do you use social media to promote your association program? I think across the board, the answer is yes, right? So social media today is not as intimidating or overwhelming as it was, let's say, even 5 years ago, right? So no one is kind of looking at you saying, I don't know what Twitter is and we're not going to use it. That kind of conversation is no longer happening. I think we've seen kind of the adaptation of all these tools, right? The adoption of all these tools into our marketing mix as we move forward. So it's fairly typical to walk into an association and kind of look at their marketing portfolio and see that they are doing some sort of social media marketing, right, from that perspective, using something, tapping into some social media vehicle, some set to promote their program. So the answer is yes for that first question. Then it comes down to another question, which is, do you use social media to generate leads and grow your membership base? Now this one is still up in the air. The answers kind of range from the yes, no, not really sure, trying to, don't really have the time for it, right? So you can run the full spectrum on that. And it's a little interesting to kind of see that, and we'll delve a little bit deeper into kind of why that might be the case. We definitely are seeing a shift in the market to adapt to that. And perhaps what's intimidating is growing the leads part, but really the vehicles that social media offers are something that for marketers are very exciting, right? So that's what we'll get into a little bit, but just something to think about if you don't use them. Right, so if you don't use social media to generate leads and grow your base, I guess the question is, why aren't you? So we'll get into a little bit of that, but I just kind of wanted to get you guys thinking a little bit before we delve into the topic. So today we'll do an overview. We'll talk about definitions as I like to kind of go through them, and then we'll really talk about why you should use social media to grow, to generate those leads, right? And then the considerations that come around that. Right, so it's not a straight up decision, yes or no, we're going to do this. I think most organizations are in a place where they are doing some sort of mix of it, whether it's integrated into the rest of their marketing campaigns. That's questionable. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. There are considerations that further come up, such as our audience really isn't out there on Twitter, so therefore should we even be on Twitter? Right, so those are good questions to have. Those are excellent questions. Those are questions that other organizations have as well. So we'll be talking a little bit about, how you can leverage all of those things together. So first off, social media is always about constant growth. I like this little representation here, this tree, if you will, of all the different things that are out there kind of that fall into the spectrum of what we're calling social media today. So again, we started very early on, maybe 5 years ago, talking about private communities, talking about Facebook. Twitter was a new thing. People were very kind of polarized in terms of opinion as to whether they liked Twitter or not, whether their organization would use it or not. There was a lot of concern about responding to members, responding to customer service via social media. What did the user-generated content that came through, was it representative? What if somebody said something negative about us, right? So there was a lot of activity, a lot of flurry of activity and back and forth and engagement and discussion around how social media kind of fits into that overall digital marketing portfolio that an association might have access to. I think if you look at this today, for the most part, you can probably do a quick checkoff of, if you're a marketer in your association, you're probably looking at this list in some capacity. If you're in membership, communications, in your group, kind of saying like, yeah, WordPress, we explored that, as a blog. I know what Pinterest is. There's nowhere in here where people are suddenly saying, I don't know what that is. I need to figure that out, right? So you're definitely seeing that full adoption kind of at that model. Now we're thinking about, like, what's the best mix for us? Should we be on everything? And then what do all these things mean for us, right? So you start to look at this tree, and then you start to think about how your marketing vehicles overlay on that, and then what activities are you doing, and what are you trying to achieve? For the overall part, social media is nice because it gives you that constant opportunity to grow, right? It just depends on how you leverage it and how you use it. So let's get a definition, first of all. This is one I took from Wikipedia. There are many kind of across the board, but I like this one just in particular because it's making you think about a couple of things that I think from the association point of view are relevant and things that you in turn can kind of take around and explain to others. So according to this, social media are web-based tools that allow people or companies to create, share, or exchange information such as career interests, ideas, images, or content in virtual communities and networks. All right, so the items that I've highlighted in red, those are really things that kind of have resonated with associations across the board. One, that it's web-based tools, right, so highly accessible to everyone. It's appropriate, right, because it kind of matches up with the audience and your expanse and your reach. It's about people as well as companies, right, so it's no longer one-to-one. It's no longer a one particular individual. It could be an organization. You can have representation using social media and having that interaction. So you're not limited kind of in scope to that. And it's all about sharing or exchanging information, which is critical to associations because that's how you position yourself, right? So very relevant and very important. And lastly, the comments about virtual communities and networks, again, kind of tying back to that online networking concept of people of their own tribes finding each other, exchanging information, whether it kind of be in a social atmosphere, whether it be a professional atmosphere, but essentially you're having all these people suddenly come together because they have common likes and interests, and they're finding ways in which to interact with each other. What's nice about this and what's really kind of changed the model, along with the fact that mobile technology and smartphones have really kind of transformed that, is this is a two-directional distribution channel. Right? So all of a sudden now we're talking about many sources of information to go to many different receivers. Right? So even if you are taking kind of the traditional content push model, content marketing push model for your broadcasting, you can suddenly broadcast from multiple channels to many people all at once. Right? So it's a very kind of powerful concept that people kind of like to gravitate towards. And this is what we want to see with associations kind of as they do this, that they're really kind of using this as a strategy to grow and to grow their membership numbers from that perspective. So why do we use social media? Well, let's look at the typical characteristics, right? So again, this is after what, 5 years? But essentially, 5 years of kind of evolution, if you will. But essentially, it's typically any type of social media that's out there today, any sort of platform, typically characterized by having, by being, Web 2.0, internet-based applications, having that kind of work behind the scenes as a technology. It's typically user-generated content is the desired output, and I don't think that's changed, right? We still want to see that fully authentic voice, that fully authentic content, having it go viral and having it resonate, because that's really kind of what that is about, right? So again, it's kind of in the face of content push marketing, if you will. It's trying to move into that more kind of pull marketing, but that's the real nice output or desire. In addition to that, you've got user-specific or user-centric profiles, right? So profiles that are managed by platform applications that are very specific in nature. So your profiles for Facebook are a little bit different from your profile for example, for LinkedIn. And the intent is different, right? So these different social platforms, they actually manage your profiles, and then they attempt to connect those profiles to other similar profiles to build that virtual community, right? So really kind of building that virtual community online and leveraging as much as possible in terms of commonality and familiarity between topics, between background, between areas of interest. So it's different from the traditional media model, right? And then that's really from these aspects here over here, right? From a reach perspective, all of a sudden now social media really is, for a marketer, it's exciting because, your reach itself is suddenly automatically expanded, right? So you're no longer dealing with, a traditional communication module or means, right? It's not a traditional channel. You're really thinking about like your reach, and it's almost exponential based on how far you can push that network down the line. In addition to now, frequency takes on a different meaning, and it's far more relevant on your content calendars. If you're looking at your editorial calendars or marketing calendars, in terms of the content that you all put together, it becomes far more relevant in terms of, what message are you putting out there and how often can you put it out there. And it's kind of combined with the immediacy piece of it, right? So because you have immediate access to a very large number of people, you can really think about the frequency of your message and what you want to put out there and have that resonate with people. In addition to that, there's a usability standpoint where you don't really have to teach anybody else how to use social media for the most part. I think it's become pretty commoditized at this point. You certainly, for your reach to happen, you don't have to wonder like, people might not be on Twitter because they don't know how to use Twitter, right? So luckily, kind of after all this time has passed, for the most part, the people that you do want to engage with, they are on Twitter, and therefore you don't have to worry about them not being able to get on Twitter, right? So again, it's a balance, right? So but the last piece I think is probably the most important because it really kind of plays into your content marketing mix, and that has to do with the quality, right? So again, that goes back to, from a marketing standpoint, you now have a channel where you can really think about the quality of the material that you're putting in front of that user, and it really does have to be of high quality, right? At this point, users are looking, if you're on social media, users are looking for an authentic voice. They're looking for an appropriate representation of your information. They are definitely looking for something that is, not wasting their time, right? So from a marketing standpoint, it's very exciting because you don't have to, it's almost like you don't have to do the preamble. You can go straight to the, I have something of value that you should look at because it's very interesting to you. So that's really kind of a key point there that it helps you with conversion because you don't have to put multiple paragraphs together to lead up to something. It can be very short and succinct. It can be different in tone. It can be a little bit more informal because all those things are expected by these social media channels now, right? So you don't have to be as formal, and because it's a two-way interaction, you could get additional communication or discussion going, right? So because of that, there are a lot of things that you can that'll help you. So, from that standpoint, what do you really care about? If you're an association marketer, you'll care about the reach because how else can you get in front of people who don't know your organization, your brand, or your program? And that's really kind of what drives this discussion about using social media to grow your membership and generate those leads. Because of this reach, it'll let you get in front of people that may not necessarily have heard about you, but it's a very kind of short gap for you to kind of fill that and outreach and likely find people who are still interacting with the organization that you can also kind of bring into the fold and introduce them to these new people. Again, the frequency, I kind of go back to the quality of the materials that you put out there. They merit the frequency, meaning that you can put as many messages out there on social media channels as much as you want, right? There is no restriction to say that you have to only send one a day. And in fact, if you only send one a day in some instances, such as Twitter, that kind of works against you, right? So it's an interesting flip of the traditional model. So really, if you have some quality materials to put in front of people that, again, speak to tone, to authenticity, that represent your brand, and that are useful and that could, in fact, lead to some sort of conversion very quickly, then, you know, more often than not, you can actually continue to post messages and you won't be ignored. You know, it's different about, you know, it's essentially kind of recognizing the conversation that's happening, inserting yourself into that conversation to have something that's meaningful versus the one time you said something and now, you know, a day later you say similar things, but, you know, there's no sort of interaction, right? So that's definitely something where that's really kind of changed in that model where you're no longer limited to, you know, the traditional model of, let's say, you know, we want to send only one email a day. We don't want to overwhelm people. In social media, much of everything is in real time. And because it's in real time, it really gives you an opportunity to find that, that cadence that works really well for you. Again, as I said, from a usability perspective, you don't have to really teach people how to use it or how to interact with you on these different channels. Again, the iconography is pervasive, and it's really amazing. Everybody knows what a like is, right? So everybody knows how to share something across platforms. So it's not necessarily on Facebook only, but even on LinkedIn, even on SlideShare, anywhere you are, on Reddit or Flickr, any of the tools or the channels that are out there, you know what you instinctively your audience, your target audience, knows what to do, which in turn will be helpful when we talk about metrics later on. And then, as I said, the immediacy piece is also very useful, right? So real time is not only acceptable, but it's preferred. We've had some organizations that actually take advantage of that from that perspective, from that time perspective, really kind of leveraging on campaigns, especially when their advocacy groups are going on, when they're lobbying on the Hill, and there's definitely something that they need to kind of, you know, harness and tap into the power of their membership. You know, it's definitely something that you can tap into. And again, you know, from the perspective of growing leads and growing your membership, again, it's something where you can find your people and have that real-time, meaningful discussion, or at least an attempt to put something in front of them that will resonate with them. And then lastly, the quality means, again, going back to the expectation is that it's a less formal way of sharing information, of getting in front of someone and having that conversation. Therefore, you're able to really cut through the noise and really offer someone something of value, right? You know, again, depending on the channel that you're using, obviously you're not limited to just 140 characters on other platforms such as LinkedIn or Facebook, but there are some best practices that, you know, I'm sure you know about, where you want to use an image to capture the attention. You want to make sure that your offer is very succinct, that you're actually, you know, not doing a lot of fluff. You're actually getting to the point in a way that's still representative of you and your brand. You're including a link so they can they can reach out and learn more, right? So all of these things together are really working to your advantage because there's all the noise, right, from that quality perspective, and ultimately go to what you're really looking for, which is conversion, right? So you're doing the lead generation part as well as trying to leverage as much as you can from that conversion standpoint. And so these are really the things that really affect you. So then from a generating leads perspective, because that's what growing a membership is, right? So growing your membership or growing your organization means getting those leads. So how do you generate those leads? And it's not an easy thing. You can't snap your fingers and say, okay, you know, over the course of a quarter, we're going to generate 50 more leads, which will result in 25 conversions, so 25 new members. Right, so it's not as simple as that. You know, it takes a little bit of finesse to try to figure that program out, right? But really, it all starts from you need a really good offer or a call to action. So you need something that's compelling enough that will make someone stop and think about what you're putting in front of them. You know, and again, you have to think about what that action is, right? That call to action, that call to arms. What do you want it to be? Do you want them to click on it and buy something? Do you want them to click on it and just simply read so you can take that impression? So a lot of this has to do with, or do you want them to click on it and share or demonstrate that they agree with your opinion that you're putting out there? So a lot of different ways to kind of map all these metrics out and these measurements out, but really you're ultimately looking for something. What is the thing that you're looking to put in front of everyone, regardless of what channel? And then obviously you need a way to digitally connect everyone together, right? So you need to have all of your digital properties that are sitting out there working together, right, to be able to kind of get that message out there and have that expandable reach. So just because you're putting something out on Twitter doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get that full reach that you would potentially get if you're doing an integrated marketing campaign, where you're not only doing it on Twitter, you're not only having your statement out there on Twitter to say we have this brand new webinar series, please join, but you're also using your current communication vehicles, right? So you've got a campaign running inside of your email marketing platform. In addition to that, you're at your annual conference, you've got a session that has to do with webinar topics or the new series that will be launching right after the conference, right? You've got all these different vehicles and all these different ways in which to connect all those points together to make sure that your offer has as much reach as possible. So that's the big challenge though, right? How do you get in front of people who don't know you? Right? And so social media is a really nice way to start that process. And this is why you'll see in a lot of diagrams, inbound marketing is one in that inbound marketing methodology. There's definitely one where they kind of say you've got your strangers who turn into visitors, who eventually turn into leads and then convert to become your customers, right? So in that model, again, they put a lot of focus on social media because that really is automatically, it's just exponentially expanded your reach into areas or into people or generations that you may not necessarily normally would have interacted with using traditional models, right? There's only so much that you can do to put banner ads in front of someone by publishing space, in a publication, right? So this kind of leapfrogs over that, and you're able to kind of reach multiple channels at the same time for users that may not necessarily have ended up on your site or know anything about your website without you reaching out to them. So the real balance and the finesse here comes in using what's inside of social media from an unpaid perspective, kind of the natural organic way to do it, as well as the paid, which is the way to amplify and influence. So we're not saying that there is only one way or another way. Typically you'll hear an organization or an agency kind of talk about both, right? So really, the mix of that, again, depends on you. It depends on your offer. Depends on what your goal is. It depends on, where your potential audience is. Essentially, you want to fish where the fish are, right? But, what we found is a combination of both is really the right mix. So again, on the unpaid side of things, you've got Twitter. You could host Twitter chats. I've worked with a lot of organizations who have actually said that our members are not on Twitter. So therefore, we are not on Twitter, which is fine. That's understood and acknowledged. If your members are not on Twitter, okay, but your potential members might be, right? So it's really thinking about, who your audience is out there, who's your prospects, right? And we talk a lot about here at HighRoad about personas. Persona development, again, comes back to that. When you do your persona development, you are supposed to be thinking about, what's the day in their life like? Right. So, and also we work with a lot of organizations who already recognize that there's a whole, internal demographic shift happening, a transformative shift happening within their membership base. Right? It's not all about the baby boomers anymore. Gen X is occupying a space here, but really kind of the potential for growth is in that large section that millennials represent. Therefore, right, while current members may not be on Twitter, your future members probably are. And that's a good enough reason to be on Twitter. So it's not to say that you should drop everything and just focus on Twitter, not at all, but you should have some sort of presence there. And it's okay to have a presence where it's just simply promotional, where you're not doing a lot of, acquisition type of campaigns, but it is something to keep an eye on. Because if you do have a campaign that, for example, you want to have a lot of real-time growth behind. It's something that's happening in the news. It's rather relevant. It's some sort of breaking alert or something that, you're taking to the hill. It's examples like that. It's situations such as that where Twitter might be a way to reach out to those potential prospects. We deal a lot with clients who are working on email marketing. We're definitely seeing the shift where they're moving away from the spray and pray approach, right? No more email blasts, a very targeted messaging, drip, nurture campaigns. There is still a lot of emphasis on all the people who've unsubscribed. So again, from the world of email marketing, you really want to focus on the people who are still subscribed, right? So while you see these people go and they've unsubscribed, okay, you still want to focus on the people who are subscribed. However, right, in those pool of those people who are unsubscribed, what if they're on Twitter and you can reach out to them on Twitter? Just because you can't email them anymore doesn't mean that you can't take that list and see if you can have it matched inside of Twitter and find their Twitter handles and then reach out to them that way to get them to re-engage. All right, so hopefully that inspires you a little bit. You know, again, don't feel like you have to shut things down simply because your people aren't there. Really what you're looking for is you're fishing for the people who you don't know about, and they probably are on these social media channels in some capacity. All right, so again, same thing for Facebook. I think Facebook is predominantly, you know, everyone's got some sort of presence or prominence there. In addition to that, you've got YouTube. So if you don't have a presence on YouTube, you probably should. Likely you've got your on-demand webinars or recordings or videos of the keynote speeches at your annual conference. You really should consider having some sort of presence there because, again, YouTube is one of those, it's one of the largest search engines in the world, right? So at least you might as well have some SEO kind of working to your advantage. But again, it's a way for people to share your materials and find you and see you represented in a different type of way. LinkedIn in particular, very popular with organizations as well. And there's a chat question here, so let me get to that in a minute. So LinkedIn in particular is one where it's very popular with associations, right? So most of your people will probably be in here in some capacity because they do all their professional networking, right? So in that case, right, so it's really kind of thinking about what content are you putting there that's of relevance and of interest that would pique their interest and get them back to you in terms of a prospect, right? Someone who's looking to kind of do something further with your organization. You want to leverage your association blog at the same time. If you have one, you should definitely be using it. You definitely want to have the ability to have as many impressions. Hopefully people leave comments. You know, again, you want to encourage that interaction, that creation of its own user-generated content. You know, your materials are out there on SlideShare, there's Pinterest, there's Instagram, any one of those kind of visuals. And then there's your private online community as well. So don't feel like that's something that does not have additional potential. Those are all the things that fall into the unpaid category. On the paid side, again, all you're thinking about here is like what ways can you amplify or influence the reach of what you're putting out there. Twitter cards are a way to do that. Syndicated content is a way to do that. Facebook has their sponsored content. Their algorithm has changed a little bit, right? So you have to really kind of do a little bit more effort to make sure that your content gets into somebody's stream. But again, it's something to consider. And then you've got a lot of potential from the LinkedIn perspective. So really a lot of potential from both sides. And of course, there's YouTube as well. Let me see what the question was. So there's a question that says, how do you deal with the fact that most people use their personal emails on social media versus their work emails an association that has in their database? And that's an excellent question. That is one that many organizations deal with on a regular basis, right? It's the primary versus secondary email. And, you know, if you're connecting with them kind of on a professional level, how do you also connect with them possibly on a social level, right? So I understand that, you know, it's human nature. We want to kind of separate our professional identities and what we do kind of in the professional world from the personal world. So, you know, again, I don't have any numbers to back this up. I think that's something that we have to look out for in the future, that separation of identities is less prevalent in the millennials, right? So your future members are not so interested in keeping that digital identity so separate and as private as the baby boomers and Gen X are. Again, like I said, I don't have numbers behind that, and I'd be super interested in kind of hearing your own feedback, your own thoughts on that, but I think that's really the direction that everyone's headed in. Having said that, there are ways kind of in the meantime, you know, from a practical standpoint to keep track of those email addresses. You could do any number of things, right? You could do, you know, touch campaigns to kind of make sure, do an inventory of who's in your database. You know, try to find matches for them. You could reach out and do a campaign to tell them, we want to make sure we're doing this in social media. We want to make sure that you're able to see what we're doing. From a prospecting perspective, I think it goes back to you still have to think about who you're trying to reach and who you're trying to target, right? If your target and your future members, and essentially we're looking for future members, for the most part, your future members are going to be in that growth pool of the millennials and Gen X. Gen X still a little touchy when it comes to privacy and separation of those identities. Millennials don't really care. Millennials are more than happy to kind of have you know that they have a blog, they have opinions, they have a personality, that they're out there on YouTube, that they've done something, right? That's why Snapchat is so popular, because it's there, but then it's not, right? So you can definitely kind of see that, and so that divergence of two identities, or going back to kind of the convergence of one identity kind of all mixed together. It's very possible that in the future, your prospects might like to just use their personal email address because they interact on a professional level. They may not be at a job very long. However, they will be your member for much longer. And so I think we have to kind of move a little bit away from that fear of like, we may not get them because now our data is kind of a mess. We don't have their personal email address, and kind of trying to see if we can get their personal email address and connect with them on that level, right? So it really goes back to also kind of that discipline. We start to tap into all those fears of, yeah, but we don't want to flood their personal email box with materials and information. You have to take a step back and think about, like, what are we flooding their box with then? If it's not of use to them and they deliberately signed up and they want it, then, how are we making it difficult for them? So we want them to help us, and we want to help them. So anyway, so getting back to why are we doing unpaid plus paid, right? And so the whole point here is, again, we want to get in front of your prospects and leads who don't know anything about your organization. They may have heard of you, but they haven't taken the extra steps. So we want to go to them. We don't want to make them come to us. It's a lot more difficult, right? So very much kind of the same philosophy of, it's difficult to find a new member. It's a lot easier to keep the members you have. Same thing with customers. We don't want to make it extra hard for them and have them do an extra step to find us. We want to be there so we can give them the information to convert right away. Again, we're looking for making an impression, right, through meaningful, relatable content. And that's where social is really important for you, because you can do that, again, through the tone of voice and what you can offer. And then lastly, you want to create awareness of your brand and program to the people who don't exist in your database at all. So I talked a little bit about reach. I'll talk a little bit more about this again. I like this diagram. This was it was a screen cap that I took at a presentation hosted by the Digital Now Fusion Productions, their group. They hosted a conference a couple of weeks ago. They had a woman from Twitter who works in their advocacy group talk about, essentially how organizations are using Twitter or can use Twitter to further promote their campaigns at kind of at that grassroots level, and really kind of build some momentum and some exposure behind their campaigns or their lobbying on the Hill. And so I thought this diagram was rather indicative of kind of, the potential of Twitter's reach. So again, you've got your logged in potential of 300 million, your logged out potential of 500 million, and then with those are, your content that gets syndicated has a potential reach of 700 million. So again, certainly there are people out there that you don't know about that really should be your members, right? So again, it's something to consider. It's not saying you dive in, head first into the world of Twitter and Twitter cards, but it's definitely something to consider if you think it's a campaign that you can definitely harness some of the potential and power of Twitter itself. So I go back to this diagram here, this graph that really is indicative of kind of the change that's happening, but the change that still needs to happen. This is the state of digital marketing and associations. Their surveys, their annual survey that they do every year. Be interesting to see what 2016 has to offer, but right now we're looking at the 2015 and 2014 data. So again, this is talking about the top digital marketing approaches. They seem to be unchanged year over year, at least the top 5 do. So of course, look at Twitter and Facebook. They're right up there, right? So social marketers, association marketers are knowing that they have to be on Facebook and they have to be on Twitter. They're out there. Right? Look at the blog, which is interesting, right? So if they have an association blog, it's not really part of their portfolio. They don't push or drive it enough, right? Again, it's hard to say like what drives that. It is a lot of effort, right? So you have to build your content. You have to find your authors. You have to make sure that your topics are relevant. It's a slow build. And then look at your online social community. Again, kind of at the bottom of the list, not really a place where you can kind of amplify stuff. And then for Facebook at paid advertising and LinkedIn paid advertising is all the way at the bottom. So we're guessing that in 2016 this might change a little bit. We'll certainly see LinkedIn paid advertising start to move up. And the reason we expect that to move up is because that is where your greatest pool of fish lie. So if you're going fishing, you have to find all your fish, and likely LinkedIn is the perfect place for that, right? So what what I'd like to kind of call out here, I think everybody knows how to use Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn overall, so I'm not going to go through here's how you use the tools, but here's what I think you should consider as a place to investigate further. If you are going to put effort into content development, you certainly should put it into LinkedIn, into your groups, take a look, who's in your group, who's in there that isn't in your membership database, who's in there that hasn't signed up for any newsletters, who's in there that interacts pretty actively on LinkedIn, right, but doesn't really interact within the organization as a whole, right? So they might be a member, and in some cases they might not be. So really kind of that's where you're prospecting from. So obviously you want to work on your content strategy so that you can do that organically, but the way to amplify that, and again, drive your leads up, LinkedIn seems to be a really good opportunity or vehicle for you to do that, right? So you have sponsored updates, which is paid content that appears in a member's newsfeed across all devices and in all applications, right? So it's a little bit different from those text ads. So it's actually inline in your content, and that's ideally, if you've read materials or articles that talk about kind of where spatial placement of advertising should be, inline is kind of the place to be. So really kind of something to consider. I like this diagram in particular because it just shows you how things kind of move down that funnel, at least from their perspective, right? So you're looking to reach net new customers. You've no idea, who they are, right? And they don't know who you are and what you can offer them, right? So you're looking at sponsored updates as kind of their opportunity for you to do some outreach, and then your sponsored email, and then obviously naturally kind of SEO, Google, to help nurture and push them down so you can acquire them, right? But the big first push, using a social media channel such as LinkedIn is up top where you do those sponsored updates. That way, you're amplifying the work that you're already doing. And I think that's really the split between what you want to think about when you're thinking about all your effort that goes into social media. What is that balance, and what is that split between the unpaid activities that you do kind of across the board as daily PR, communications, as well as what is that split of how much money are you going to put behind paid advertising in that area, right? What kind of lift do you want to put behind certain campaigns that are of relevance if you know your prospect pool is probably in there somewhere? So they have two types of sponsored content on LinkedIn. One is the updates. They show up on your company page or your showcase page. They could be amplified to your audiences in your paid program, and then you've got direct sponsored content. It doesn't appear on your company or showcase page. It appears kind of inline in sponsored content in your targeted market, right? So again, what you're doing is you're leapfrogging over the how do I find them to I have a pool of people who match, and that's what LinkedIn does really well is they offer you, here are all the demographics that you can match on. You can match on skills, you can match on industry, you can match on title, you can match on education, you can match on professional development or what groups they're part of, right? So you have a lot of ways you can slice and dice and get in front of the people who are likely, to bite or be interested in what you might have to offer. So the reason we like LinkedIn so much, from that perspective is that it really goes back to content, which, is a bigger conversation, but most of everything that happens on social media is still tied to content. If you don't have anything to say, social media can't work for you, right? So you still, as a team, your marketing team is still working very hard on kind of what do we have to say, what's our content going to look like, what do we have to put in front of people on all these different vehicles, right? So effective content on LinkedIn needs to be valuable, it needs to be relevant, it needs to be strong in tone and voice, right? And again, it matches back well with what we like about social media overall, right? Because now we're talking about, again, we're going back to reach, we're going back to frequency, we're going back to the general usability. Everybody knows what to do. If they like your articles, if they like your sponsored content, they'll like it, right? They'll do something about it. They'll share it. There's an immediacy to it. Again, you get the results in real time. You get in front of them in real time. You get results in real time. You yourself can take your content and make it very relevant to what's happening centered around you. And then it goes back to quality. I think that's probably the last one. The point about quality kind of sums all three of these items on LinkedIn very well, right? The fact that your content itself has to be valuable, it's relevant, it's strong in tone and voice, it represents what you want them to understand about you. So it's really kind of a focus back on that. So then to recap, really, we want to see everyone use social media as a means to grow, right? So it's one thing to kind of promote and promote your message and kind of say that, hey, we have a number of programs going on, our webinar is coming up, please sign up. It's another thing to kind of take your message of we have a webinar coming up and figuring out a way, how do we put it in front of people who don't even know we do webinars, right? So where would we go to do that? And that's really kind of something that you want to think about. In that example, you could start looking at SlideShare, right? If people are looking for downloadable material, perhaps you want to go back there and see what you could do to say, you could listen to it live. You don't have to download it, right? You can get it in real time. We're hosting a panel discussion, a virtual panel discussion. We have a radio, we have a podcast. Perhaps that's something you're interested in. Right? There are a lot of cross connections that you can think about. They still go back to kind of what does your potential prospect look like, but you can most likely find them doing something inside of social media from some aspect. So consider your content as well as your audience. Definitely consider your timing and relevancy, right? So that is the play for social media, that if you are doing social media marketing, you really have to think about, what does that whole content calendar look like from that perspective? Likely, if you've got a social media expert on your team or someone who's responsible for that, they sit there with a spreadsheet and they've got a whole list of tweets, they've got a whole list of posts that are already scheduled and mapped out in advance. And that is an excellent way to approach it because, again, it's acknowledging that the content that goes onto social media has to be more than once. It has to be frequent. It has to be consistently posted, and it's got to be relevant, right? So that's what they'll lean on, kind of the rest of the team to say, what do you have going on? And likely you'll be fielding questions like that from them, saying, what do you have going on that we can put in there that's relevant across the industry, across the association, across what our members are talking about? So it's really kind of, digging a little bit deeper and trying to figure out ways in which to get that material out to people who know about you as well as those who don't know about you but might have similar pain points that you offer to solve for them. So what's nice about social media, again, is you don't have to convince you don't have to convince the value of social media to your membership. You don't have to convince it to, you certainly don't have to convince the value of it to your management team as well. I think that's kind of, that problem has been solved. I think everybody knows that you have to be in social media at some capacity. It's just a question of what does that mix look like today, right? So again, going back to, there's a lot of effort in putting that some sort of mix together that's leveraging your unpaid activities as well as your paid. So again, I'm not going back to say that you should put all your money into paid social media. I'm saying that what it makes sense is, especially if you're looking to acquire leads, without having that, it takes a lot longer. You can still do it. You'll absolutely get some leads. The paid aspect of it, using that to influence and to drive it and amplify your voice in certain areas or certain channels, will accelerate your leads that come in. And that's really kind of what the intent is. So play around with both, see what's coming up. Again, talk to your team. Your team member that's responsible for social media likely will be able to have ideas about, what campaigns that are ongoing, what campaigns that are time sensitive, which ones do we need to do some sort of, move the movement, like move the ground, move the market, move the needle, what kind of those compelling campaigns can we tap into and leverage so that along the way you're going to be able to kind of track all those people who didn't suddenly know about you, but all of a sudden now you've got all these people following you in some capacity on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on YouTube, SlideShare, wherever they kind of reside. So lastly, you need social media to grow, you need to generate those leads. So go back to thinking about your content, what your offers are, and really who you're reaching out to. I think it still stems back from, those personas and thinking about, what a day in their life is like and how they consume information, how they consume information overall, kind of where they live in terms of the digital sphere, where are they, how much time do they spend on what, what devices do they use to consume the information, and then, of course, how do they consume your information? And thinking about ways in which you can kind of cross-connect that, essentially to kind of find those people that you are fishing for. So that's a wrap-up of our overview for today. We'll continue to talk about this topic for the rest of the month. Next week, the 13th, Friday the 13th, we'll be talking about best practices. So essentially, we'll be looking at examples of things that could inspire you to do additional campaigns, both paid and unpaid, ways in which you can mimic them, ways in which you can get inspired and create your own, Just some examples of what you could do to kind of take away and see what you could do and play around with. What's nice about, again, social media, which I think everyone would agree, is that you can try something pretty fast. You don't have to do a massive amount of investment in the technology. You don't have to do massive, it's not a huge investment in time. You can mobilize pretty quickly and try something out and actually see the results pretty quickly as well. Because it's so real time, it's unlikely that, something that you were to post, at the beginning of next week would be revisited in 2 weeks, and you'll have to wait for 2 weeks to see what that looks like. You can probably get your results at the end of the week and see what that uplift looks like. So it's really nice because you can adjust and refine from that standpoint. And so that leads to our next webinar that'll be on the 20th, where we'll be talking about measuring for success. And so essentially, this one's really interesting because we're talking about metrics such as ROE, return on engagement. You may have heard of that. We'll be talking about essentially kind of, for your organization, what's more important for you? Do you feel that, a click versus not a click, a like versus a share, which one's the higher interaction value for you, and how do you measure that for success? Right, so obviously you want that ultimate final conversion where they say they're interested in applying, but how do you lead to that, and how do you kind of demonstrate or demonstrate to the rest of your team and your organization that your activities that you're doing on social media are generating some sort of growth and word of mouth. So we'll be talking about those as well. So thanks very much for your time today. I'll give you back a couple of minutes for the rest of your Friday. I'm going to leave the line open so that if you have any questions that you want to post during the chat window, certainly feel free to, so I don't cut you off. And otherwise, thanks very much for your time today.